Welcome, everyone. This is Bill Fanning. Glad you all could be here. I'm excited for today's conversation, and we're going to be up and running in a second. So, very happy to have Hilke Schellmann here with us, and she'll be back on the screen in just a second. But today we're going to be talking about some research in a book she created called The Algorithm. And it's as we discuss, it's about AI and how it makes decisions, either both selective and assistive in terms of the hiring process, and some of the challenges that she discovered in her research. So I'm really excited to go through that. Before we get into that, I just wanted to ask, yesterday, I sent out just a quick, I think it's a quick, I tried to keep it quick. If it wasn't quick, I apologize, but it was meant to be a quick user survey. 10 simple questions, but all I wanted to do was get a little bit of feedback around where we should focus in 2025 from your perspective. I have a lot of, as I'm sure you do, a lot of things coming at me in terms of technology, AI, the different ways that sourcing and things are evolving. And so I want to bring that type of content to our weekly discussions so we can create really meaningful engagements that allow us to focus on things that are near and dear and important to us rather than things that we all pretty much understand and know what's going on. So if you get a chance to fill it out, that'd be awesome. Um, so uh, outside of that, and I normally have my screen up, but unfortunately, PowerPoint is giving me an issue at the moment. It's telling me I need to do some type of update. So I'm not. It's what happens when you use Microsoft on an Apple computer. So I'm not turning my PowerPoint on, but definitely excited. So Hilke's with us, and I'm going to let her do a quick introduction. But today's goal is really to understand some of the learnings and findings she found in the research creating the book, The Algorithm, and give you an opportunity to discuss that with her. And then I thought it might be interesting to also talk about maybe some learnings and things that have come to light after, because, as you start focusing on a topic, you continually get new insights and new learnings along the way. And so that's really the goal of today's conversation, with Hilke helping us do it, is to learn a little bit more about AI in the hiring process from her research, and give us a little bit deeper of an understanding that we all need to be successful in the next couple of years as this technology becomes more pervasive, not just in talent, but in everything we do. It's really interesting. It's funny. So if anyone doesn't know this, I'm uniquely agile and skilled as a physical athlete. So 3 weeks ago, I decided to fall down the stairs and blow my knee out. And AI actually played a process in getting into the hospital now in the check-in process. Like, it was really interesting. It was native language. It was very simple. It was asking me questions about what I wanted, what I needed, what was my pain levels at. But based on that information, the doctor came back with prescriptive um, decisions already being made for the types of medicines and things like that that we should talk about. So it's really interesting how AI is evolving into all the things we're doing. So I'm Hilke. I'm giving you a little bit of a foreshadow, but maybe if you could take a minute and just share with everybody your background and kind of how this came about, and then we can talk a little. Then we can switch from that into some of your research and findings.
Totally. I just also pasted a link into the chat talking about AI and medical stuff because I just did a story with the AP on that. So, hey, everyone. So excited that you were all here. My name is Hilke Schellmann. I'm an investigative journalist, book author, and I also teach journalism at NYU. And I just want to give you, so I wrote this book, but I also did a lot of stories leading up to the book. So I just wanted to give you a quick sense how I even got to writing a book about AI in the workplace. It's about hiring and also how folks are using AI in the workplace. And if you want to, I want to invite you to post in the chat what kind of interests you specifically about AI in the workplace. I'm happy to answer any question about people analytics or resume parsers or whatever is on your mind. We'll also have a Q&A, but happy to also dive into specific questions. So I wanted to just give a quick overview. So I found the topic of AI and hiring by taking a Lyft ride. So like if you don't have Lyft in your area, it's like sort of an Uber ride. It was in late 2017. I was in Washington, D.C. at a conference with a lot of lawyers that had nothing to do with AI. And I needed a ride to the train station to take a train back home to New York. And I got in the back of the Lyft and asked the driver, how you doing? And in the history of me taking a Lyft, I take it somewhat often because I live in New York City and don't have a car. The driver said, I've had a weird day. And I was like, oh, yeah? Why did you have a weird day? I'm a nosy journalist. And he was like, I just had an interview with a robot, job interview. And I was like, what? A job interview with a robot? So he explained to me that he had applied for a baggage handler position at Ronald Reagan Airport. And that, quote unquote, a robot called him that day and asked him 3 questions about the job. So this was 7 years ago, somewhat early on with AI. We knew about AI, but maybe not to the extent that we know now that like AI has penetrated our lives. I just got really interested and made a note and looked into it. And I went to a conference a few weeks later on AI, and there was somebody who had just left the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission who talked about that she's really worried about surveillance of workers, that she has seen AI and basic algorithms being used to go through employees' calendars and understand how many hours they're absent and how many hours they're at work. And she was really worried that, this was pre-pandemic, that people who have caregiving obligations, mostly mothers and people with disabilities who have in general longer absentee times might get penalized here, and that would be protected classes, and that might be against the law. We also talked about hiring, and she talked about a company, HireVue, that at the time used facial expression analysis to hire people. So I wanted to just show a clip from the first investigation I did for the Wall Street Journal, because I think it sort of highlights visually really well what kind of world we've entered. And at the time, already, this was in 2018, large companies were using it. So there's Unilever, Hilton, think JP Morgan Chase and others were using the technology. And I was like, wow, I had no idea how prevalent it already was. And in one way, we call them one-way video interviews, one-way audio interviews. So instead of having someone in a Zoom on the other side talking to you, which I think we got pretty much accustomed for job interviews during the pandemic, there's no one on the other side. You get like prompts via video or just text on screen, and you sort of record yourself either on your phone or on your desktop, sort of presenting yourself. So I wanted to, and at the time, HireVue was analyzing people's facial expression, intonation of their voices, and the audio, the words that they're speaking. So I just wanted to share a short video clip so we all sort of start at the same place. And you will see my former colleague, Jason, who's terrific, taking the test. So let me see, share sound, optimize for video sharing. Let me know if it's not coming through. Hoping it will. It's like a 2-minute clip.
We begin our exploration of the new world of hiring with a visit to the headquarters of one of the companies that's pushing the envelope, HireVue. Its artificial intelligence assessment tool is used by over 50 companies, including Unilever and Hilton, which both declined to comment. This, I'm told, is a typical digital interview for someone applying to become a customer service rep. It confronts me with several scenarios that, on the job, I might encounter.
If you can't help me resolve this right now, I'm going to take my business elsewhere.
I'm here to try to make things better.
I go into this knowing something that HireVue acknowledges many job candidates potentially do not. That my responses are being assessed not by human beings, but by AI, analyzing my tone of voice, the clusters of words I use, and my micro-expressions.
So here's what's wild to me. The notion of micro-expressions, is that what you're calling them?
It's the facial analysis software. It's capturing, if you think of facial movement, smiling, frowning, eyebrow movement, those are actual database points, and they roll together to give certain emotions and traits and personality and thinking style things.
Here I am.
Yeah.
I just did the interview for a job as a customer support representative. How'd I do?
The first thing is we look at the AI score that's attached to it, and you can see that up here. You scored it at 37%.
That's pretty good, right?
No, that's out of 100, right? So you're kind of in the bottom third, if you will, in that job, so you'd be a low match, essentially.
My rating is the result of HireVue's AI comparing my responses to those of actual employees. Essentially, my performance is being compared. My voice, my words, my facial expressions against a company's highest performers.
So you think if an employer were to see that number, would I be written off most likely? Would it be filtered out of the process completely?
No, absolutely not, actually. What we would recommend is that the candidates could be rank ordered by that, but they still go and look at the different videos.
So you're telling me that everybody who goes through this, they get seen by someone?
Can be. They want to watch all the videos.
But they might
not.
decide, hey, this guy Jason only has 37%, not even worth our time.
If you score so low, they might say we may not watch all the videos, but they may watch a question. They
All right.
confer with that score and then move on.
So just to give you a quick idea of what you may encounter. So when I looked into this in 2018, I was kind of, like really surprised. I was like, oh, who knew that like facial expressions are predictive of success in the job? So I started as journalists, we always say like trust, but verify. So I started to verify this. I was like, wow, I wonder what science there is behind that. And I talked to psychologists who study facial expression analysis, emotions, and I was surprised when they told me, well, there is no science. We have no science what facial expressions you need in a job interview that would, sort of be meaningful to understand what you should be, how you should perform in the job. The same with intonation of our voices. And, I think the good thing that came maybe out of this investigation and others, there was another one in the Washington Post. There was somebody complained to the FTC about HireVue, and eventually HireVue stopped using the facial expression analysis. What we see a little bit in the space is a little bit of whack-a-mole sometimes. HireVue stopped using this kind of facial expression analysis, and later also the intonation of our voices. There's still a couple of other companies that still use it because I think the technology is out there, and I think a lot of people feel like, oh, we have the technology to do this kind of stuff. Let's use it. It must be meaningful because we can use it, and it like changes our, checks our facial expressions. And the idea is that something about this is meaningful. Something about my bodily expression is meaningful, and I would argue in this case, we don't actually know. We don't actually have science here, and I think we see this, sort of a similar pattern again and again. So, and for any of you who may have not heard of HireVue, they're one of the largest providers of these video interviews, and there's two ways that they do it. The product is the same, like you do the video interview, and sometimes human managers will watch the video, and sometimes AI may do the analysis. Right now, it's only the voices, the words that you use. But they do pull some interesting capabilities out of it, like how much of a team worker you are. And I do wonder sometimes, like, oh, what's the scientific basis on that? So I'm trying to look into that because I think that's also kind of interesting to understand. HireVue, somebody did the math. They do about like 100,000 or so daily interviews with those. They've done 2.5 years ago, they said they did their 30 millionth. So, we see this is pretty ubiquitous in hiring. What's also ubiquitous in hiring, so we have this problem, right, in hiring since the dawn of job platforms, really. So like LinkedIn, Indeed, and ZipRecruiter, when they all started, it was great. It's like makes it very easy for job seekers to find jobs. They're all in one portal. You can, 1 or 2 clicks, you can easily apply. What that led to on the employer side is that they often get bombarded, or they feel like they're drowning in job applications. So IBM gets like 5 million or so applications a year. Google gets 3 million. I mean, they just feel like they're drowning. And, we've now seen anecdotal evidence from recruiters who say, well, with the rise of generative AI, and it's very easy for folks to like generate cover letters, generate resumes. And there's even like, I don't know if you've all heard of AI, Hawk AI. that's a tool that actually can apply for folks automatically. So it can apply to like 200 jobs in an hour, and you don't have to do anything. It can answer all of those questions. And folks, we've seen now that a lot of recruiters get even more resumes and feel even more overwhelmed. And I think there's somebody in the chat that
Yeah, Susan just mentioned that they're getting resumes that are AI generated based on the job description. And Susan, just to give you a little anecdote, so my son is looking for a new job. And so I have been in this industry for a long time. I was like, hey, do you want some help? He's like, Dad, no, what do I need help for? I take the job description from Indeed. I put it in ChatGPT. Then I attach my resume and I say, make my resume perfect for this job. He hits a button, out comes a resume, and that's a resume he applies with. And that's how he's applying for jobs. So it's really interesting to see. And that's not even looking at the coaching capabilities that now come into your into doing an interview. And I forget the name of the company. I forgot it. It was in my brain and went back out. But you can now have your questions answered in a Zoom call on the side of your screen.
Yeah,
I mean,
we've seen this too, right? That candidates, even if there's a human on the other side, obviously with like a HireVue interview, you get a prompt and then you have a couple of minutes to give an answer. And some people put that into ChatGPT, and we've seen this too, or another large language models, and we've seen this too, that even in live interviews, people put the questions into an LLM and then answer. And I think that like with talent acquisition people, some people feel it's cheating. Some people feel like, well, the candidate is really resourceful. Like, so I think the jury's out on that. And I think Susan has said that, they even had people impersonating others, or there might not even be a real person there. I've done this too. Like this was a couple of years ago. I tested that with some video interview software where I wasn't in front of the camera. And so no one was in front of the camera and I was on the side, and I deep faked my voice and just gave the prompts with writing it. Obviously, technology had advanced at a super easy clip. This is super easy now. And I still got a high rating. So the software didn't even notice that there's no human in front of the camera, and that a deep fake was answering the question. So I think that's actually a call. If you work in talent acquisition, make sure that like your providers have at least like a minimum sense of that there is a human in front of the camera answering those questions, right? Like there's also like I wonder, like, do we have to do an identity check soon or something? Because I think we've also seen from companies that said there's people, there's somebody else taking the assessment and the test, because then the candidate shows up on day first and they just look very different, or they can't actually do the work that you had selected them to do, right? So it's like it's really difficult. So we need like more security here, and there's and I think I was surprised how little HireVue and others have like built in kind of security here or thought about that. So what I also did, and I think Bill, you sort of mentioned it already. There's like, but what we see pretty ubiquitous in hiring, a technology is we call resume parsing or resume screeners, right? Like, and I've talked to like LinkedIn and ZipRecruiter and all of these companies. So when you upload your resume there and your cover letter, if you still have a cover letter, I think this might be the death of the cover letter, is sort of maybe I have hypothesis with all the generation of applications. I don't know if anyone is still reading them, but if you upload them to any of the providers, they also use AI. We don't know exactly what kind of AI, because they don't have to register with anyone or tell anyone. They use AI. And then often what we see on large company sites as well, because they get inundated with resumes, they have applicant tracking systems, which I think in the old days were sort of glorified spreadsheets. So you could track where a candidate was in the funnel, meaning like, you had received the application, there was maybe a phone screener, now they advanced to the next round or they were rejected. And the large companies that provide these applicant tracking system also now have AI built in. We don't necessarily know if a company who uses this applicant tracking system, what they turn on or not. Like, it's like not very clear. But we know the capabilities are there. And what I've done, I've talked to a lot of employment lawyers and industrial organization psychologists who often get called in when an AI vendor and a company start talking to each other, and the company wants to do their due diligence. They might bring in outside counsel, in this case, a bunch of employment lawyers, and what I heard from them and one IO psychologist, when they looked at the resume parsers, they looked at the technical reports and also wanted to know what are the keywords that the tool found out works. And this is for mostly tools that work not with like, here's a job description and here is a resume and how much overlap there is, which I think, to be honest, job seekers are also getting really knowledgeable about and using tools like JobScan and others, which tell them, okay, the job description has these kinds of keywords, and here are the keywords you have to have at least in your resume to have like an 80% overlap or something. These are probably tools that are built on deep neural networks, which the term you can totally forget in a second. But what that means is like it's based on training data, maybe resumes of people who are successful in the role. You give that to the machine, and then the machine figures out, okay, what do all these people or these resumes have in common? And it's not necessarily clear to the developers themselves, the people that built the software, what are the words that the machine infers success upon. You can always ask the computer, tell me what you have inferred upon, and that's exactly what the employment lawyers did that I spoke to, and they found things like that in some cases there was the word, for example, first names like Thomas were predictors of success. So if you had the word Thomas on your resume, you got more points. Obviously, humans know that your first name doesn't qualify you for anything, but a machine does what it does best. My hypothesis is that it did a statistical analysis, and maybe in the pile there were a lot of Thomases, and so it found that statistically this is a relevant keyword. Obviously, we also know that humans are incredibly biased as well. Like we know from like social science and sending recruiters the same resumes with different first names, that people who have like maybe a more African-American sounding first name get fewer calls back than people have like a white sounding or Caucasian sounding first name. So we know that like humans are also biased, right? And we know that women in the workforce, people with disabilities, people of color have been underestimated for decades. But the tools have their own problems. We've also seen what the employment lawyers told me was that suddenly places were relevant, like Canada and Syria were predictors of success. Obviously, that could be discrimination based on national origin, which you're not allowed to do in this country. There's also a tool that used the words Africa and African American as keywords. Another tool used, if you had the word baseball on your resume, you got more points. And if you had the word softball on your resume, you got fewer points. Probably gender discrimination, right? Because women traditionally play softball. So probably what this meant is that in this pile of resume, maybe the company had hired more men in the past, and maybe some of them liked baseball. It figured out over time that baseball is a predictor of success, and softball is not. And those are the kinds of things that I found out, and that worries me, because obviously we want to hire people for the skills and capabilities that they have, and not their background, their gender, their preferences. The problem is that with this kind of technology, if the people who built the technology don't know what the tools actually kind of infer upon, and the companies that use it also don't necessarily know that either, obviously job seekers know almost close to nothing, that kind of worries me, right? Whereas in 30, 40 years ago, we wouldn't know how people would be hired. Like we would know the assessments, and people have challenged those in courts, right? We've known that, like, for example, for like firefighter positions, people had to like haul 200 pounds from A to B, and women or other groups have challenged that in court and said like, hey, I'm not sure, like, do you really need to haul 200 pounds, or is this a way to keep women out? And people have to make their case in court, and that is like harder and harder now to dissect, because you sent your application out and you're not sure how it's going to be assessed. Obviously, when you do a video interview, you know that you're being assessed, that somebody is assessing this. Most people that I talked to actually thought that a human being was assessing them, even though I knew for some of them, they applied for a specific company that I knew, okay, they're only using the AI tool. So that's another thing that I found. And I wanted to share a couple more examples and then totally open it up to any kinds of discussion. One is like, so I think a lot about people, in video interviews or audio interviews. What is with people like me who have an accent? Maybe people who have an even thicker accent. What is with people who speak a dialect? What is with people maybe have a speech disability? Will the tool that converts, the first step that these tools do, they convert the words that we speak into transcription, and then the AI tool uses the transcription to infer your capabilities and your skills, and if you are, it estimates if you're going to be successful in the role. So when I talked to HireVue and others, they told me, oh, there's this specific threshold that candidates have to hit. They don't hit it because maybe they have a speech disability or they have an accent, and the tool, quote unquote, can't understand them. Obviously, the tool doesn't have consciousness, but can make sense of the words. You would get an error message, and a human would get in touch with you. And so I thought, okay, let's test it. I got access to some tools, and one tool was supposed to understand how well I speak English. It's used in call centers, especially in the global South, that hires people for American consumers. So one of the things, obviously, like, how well do you speak English? When I answered all the questions in English, I got an 8.5 out of 9 English proficient. And I was like, wow, look at this. Tool works. And, I don't really have a thick accent anymore, apparently. It's great. And then I thought, well, I don't really have a speech disability, but I want to test the tool. And I thought, like, well, if I speak German to it, which is my first language, it will definitely send me an error message because, I'm speaking a totally different language. So I sent it out and I didn't get an error message. In fact, I got a 6 out of 9 English proficiency score back. And I didn't say anything about work. I just spoke in German, and I read the Wikipedia entry on psychometrics, which is sort of the assessment, the science of assessment. So I wanted to share just a 1-minute audio clip that we did for a podcast that I think has some of the interesting things here.
So, Hilke, you also tried speaking German to my interview, and you got a score there, too.
I did get a score, but first I got a transcript of what I said.
Okay, so this is what it interpreted your words to be. And I'm just going to read from the transcript here, which does not make a lot of sense. So, humidity is a desk, a beat up. Sociology does it iron, mind material, nematode adapt, secure location, Masons the first half gamma, their fortunes in.
Yep, it's gibberish.
Okay, what results did you get from this?
I was scored a 73% match for the role, although I didn't speak a word of English, and the things I said in German had nothing to do with the questions I was asked or with the job itself.
Because you were reading a German Wikipedia page.
Yeah, actually, 73% is pretty high. And I wanted to make sure this language discovery was just not based on me speaking German. So one of the graduate students who I work with was kind enough to record herself in Chinese reading the same Wikipedia text. She scored 80%, and her English transcript is gibberish just like mine.
Right, bringing us back once again to this question of, are these machines making decisions based on scientific evidence, or are they just guessing?
Yep, that's the elephant in the room.
And while we're at it, we actually, in journalism, we always go back before we publish. And here's like an excerpt. I think it's actually the whole conversation. We went back to my interviews, the provider here, and asked them, told them what we did and wanted their reaction and also an explanation. So I'll just play it really quickly. It's another minute of what we got from them.
Before we go, we want you to know we told the companies behind the systems we tested about what we did. and about our results. And this is what we heard back. Curious Thing AI thanked us for testing their system. My interview did too. And they also got on the phone with us to talk about what we found.
It knows that you weren't speaking English for sure.
Clayton Donnelly is My Interview's industrial organizational psychologist.
But then it defaults to audio only. Then it won't use your content. Because the content you can see, it's like it's random. It's random nonsense. So it won't read that at all unless we tell it to do that.
So you were saying it didn't take the transcript at all into consideration, just the intonation of my voice. And I scored a 73% match. Like the intonation of my voice was a 73% match with the role.
Yeah. Well done.
Okay, so he says the system understood that you weren't speaking English.
But if the system scored me on the intonation of my voice alone, I still don't understand how it could pull a full personality analysis on me, showing, for example, that I'm way more innovative than consistent. How do you find that in the sound of my voice?
So that was an additional thing. It also pulled, my big 5 personality analysis. But I want to show this because I think actually that, like, if you work in talent acquisition or you work in recruiting and you have access to these tools, like, I always encourage people, like, to test these tools before you buy it, and maybe have a pilot phase and really test these out, because, like, it worries me if I can speak German to the tool, I'm still 87% qualified for the job. 73% qualified for the job. My mistake. That does worry me. Like, if we have these tools that we use like this, like, what are they actually inferring upon? I think one other concern that I have a lot when I look at these tools and test them is also what is with people with disabilities. Like, we have to make sure that this is, a merit-based system, and that we don't exclude people now that we digitize and automate a lot of the hiring process. So I just wanted to bring one more example that came out of, this is a tool that is being used by a lot of banks and a lot of, like, investment banks that want to check how good people are at, they get a lot of, in early talent, they get a lot of applications. So Goldman Sachs said, for example, that for their summer internship, they got over 200,000 applications. What are they going to do? And folks look all very talented and they have all wonderful degrees, but they don't necessarily have a deep work history yet. So how are they going to choose? So some of these companies are using video games instead of personality tests that are calibrated by people who are currently in the role playing the video game. So if they're risk takers, I'm like sort of generalizing here a little bit, or simplifying it, then the tool would look like, am I a risk taker too? Do I blow up a lot of balloons or not? Here's like one of the games that I've played. Here's one of the games. You play a suite of games. This is me reading the instructions. Take a very long time to do that, so I wanted to understand what I'm doing. And then, so you have to choose a hard or an easy task. And I chose a hard task. And then the job is to, what you have to do is, like, repeatedly hit the space bar to fill this bar. And while I was playing it, I was kind of wondering, like, what does it have to do with the job? Like, why do I have to hit the space bar as fast as possible? I wonder what it's measuring. Seems wild. And when I played it with Henry Claypool, who is quadriplegic, he was really worried, like, what is with people who maybe have a motor disability, who actually can't hit the space bar as fast as possible? They might still be qualified to do the job. They just may not be able to hit the space bar as fast as possible. So they might get rejected for something that has nothing to do with the job. And I think we see this again and again in a lot of these systems, that folks who maybe have a disability are often not in the training data because they're underrepresented in the workplace. And even if they're in the workplace, if you have, like, some folks with disabilities and they actually are part of the training data, disabilities are often expressed very individually. So somebody who may be autistic, you know, generates this kind of data, and the next person does it very differently because it's expressed so individually that, you know, it's sort of the question is like, how would a tool that's built on like statistical analysis actually be able to have all of these different cases in the tool? And I think what's also very difficult for people with disabilities, if they're being asked to play a game or, you know, do a video interview, first of all, you may not know what's coming up, right? Yeah, I didn't know that I had to hit the space bar as fast as possible. I thought maybe I could do that. You know, I could conclude the games, but, you know, people with disabilities also don't often want to ask for an accommodation, which, you know, is legally their right. But they're often afraid that they're going to land on like a sort of mythical, you know, pile B, where no one wants to look. So I think, you know, that's sort of the difficulty that we're seeing here with some of these tools. And, you know, I wish I could, you know, answer anyone's question of like, are human more biased or AI tools more biased? I don't actually know that. I would love to do longitudinal studies. I think what does worry me is like with these AI tools, is like if we use them, you know, the scope is just totally different here. So a company may use it on all incoming applications, whereas like one hiring manager can discriminate against so and so many people. But if you use it on like 5 million people that apply to your company, and, you know, your tool over time downweighs women, or, you know, people have the word don't have the word softball on their resume or something like that, you know, you might discriminate against a whole lot of people than one biased hiring manager could. So I think we have to be a lot more scrutinize these tools a lot more than we might be doing already. So with that, I wanted to open it up to questions, comments, thoughts, experiences yourself have, anything else I can answer.
Sure. If anybody has a question, feel free to drop in the chat or raise your hand. The one question that I had, because I definitely understand and have seen and experienced some of the scrutinizing issues that AI creates, right? Where it looks at past historical data and then makes decisions based on that, which can amplify racial, ethnic, and gender bias. I do believe today, though, we may be in a place where the AI is evolving to, instead of eliminate, to start comparing and start bringing people into processes where a recruiter or a person like me, a layman, just looking at somebody's resume, may not be able to make those comparisons intelligently. And I'm thinking about specifically technical resources and the technologies that they work on. So I may have a job description that says you need to work on tech stack A. And somebody submits a resume that says I have 15 years of experience in tech stack B. So for me as an individual, I'm like, you know, former infantry officer, nope, that's just not a fit. But with an assistive technology being able to come in and show me the comparison levels of, or putting a percentage against that, I think is very interesting to me. So I'm wondering, from anyone's perspective on, and Hilke, definitely you, but everyone else, how are we, is anyone experiencing that kind of transitional shift in the AI supportive capabilities that are being delivered today?
I mean, I hope that is happening, right? That like we have AI that may be able to, instead of like nurse, would also understand that maybe a registered nurse or something like that is also a very similar job, right? And if you know, you know, Python as a programming language, you probably also know Hadoop and maybe C++, right? We know that like some tools are capable of that through historical data to look at that. So it can, because we know that, for example, women are a little bit more shy what they put on their resumes, right? They're often wait also till they're like 100% qualified to apply for a job, where a lot of men may be a little bit more aggressive. So like an AI system could level the playing field. We've just seen LinkedIn release a tool. I don't know if that's just for premium people, but you can see, hey, this job requires this, and based on your resume, what you have on your LinkedIn, you're qualified 60%, and here are the skills that you're missing. And the skills that it puts out missing, like for somebody I know, was like, you're missing high pressure environments. And I'm like, first of all, it's possibly the same thing. And the tool doesn't quote unquote understand that. So I wish we had those tools already. I think there's some companies that say that they have it, but I don't think we have fully seen all those capabilities yet and tested it vigorously. That it can make those assumptions.
Yeah, and Christopher asked a great question in chat. And do we think that AI is in a bubble right now? And will it become a revolutionary tool, or just something that can help automate certain tasks? I think that's a great question. It's something I think about quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like, you know, I think it is already a transformative technologies in many ways. And I think that the jury is just out to think about, like, is it really good at predicting the future, right? Like, it's really good at like synthesizing text for technical reports, for emails. It's really good at like assuming this is probably the half next sentence that comes most of the time. Do you want to write this? It can generate beautiful slideshows for us. Like, it's really great. It can generate video and audio, and you know, I have some thoughts of that about that as a journalist, but how useful that is. So it can definitely automate a lot of tasks. I think we still have to be really careful. The idea, like, can it predict the future? Because I think to be successful in a job, you know, we know sort of like best case scenarios. What you should do, you should look for skills and capabilities of people, right? Not for their hair color, not the way they speak, and any of those kinds of things. The problem is, like, a lot of these tools are calibrated on people who are currently in the job. So if you're not a diverse company, what you might encounter is that your tool just replicates sort of the biases that you have had in the past, right? So I think there's also more to hiring than just looking at the skills and capabilities of the candidate, right? Some of the things will always be unknown. You know, I could have a difficult pregnancy and have to drop out of the workforce, or I have to take care of my parents or my children, right? I might just drop out for that. Like, no tool can actually predict that. But there's also a question, like, you know, if you come into a team, do people think about, like, well, how does this team work? And like, I think there can be a more holistic way of hiring, of like skills assessment. If you still want to do an interview, you can do that. I would maybe move away if you want to do personality analysis, which I know a lot of companies want to do because it's sort of a buzzword to like have agile employees, lifelong learners. But you know, the question is really like I think even like on a good day, personality tools are 10% predictive. And that's even like a reach of our work performance. And on bad days, really like 1 or 2%. So a lot of our work is actually not predictive by our personality, and we can like overcome our personality. So I think if you use that, maybe use it only with other things on top of that to look at people. Sorry, and I see a hand. So Edvard.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate the conversation here. So a quick reflection and then just a question. One, in any of your sort of research investigation, you know, I think one of the things that I've observed that's missing is maybe some benchmarking with a lot of these tools. You know, similar to, you know, just general purpose technology like ChatGPT and other open, you know, models that are out there today. There is performance and benchmarking that's done. Do you foresee, or did you see in any of your investigation, our industry starting to go towards that way? And then the second, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no.
And then the second one was going to be from an accommodation standpoint. Do you foresee there being more guidance also too around how companies should be responding to those accommodations?
I mean, I think starting with the accommodations, I think the only guidance we've had, right, on AI in the hiring place is actually the EOC putting out a guidance on people with disabilities, saying like, you have to prove that your tools work for people with disabilities, otherwise we're going to take a closer look. I'm not privy to know what the EEOC is investigating, but we haven't seen a whole lot of investigations based on AI tools. So I'm not sure what they're doing. So we know they're aware of it. I think what I was a little worried about, what I heard from people who are often vocational counselors who work with people with disabilities and try to get them into the workforce, they said when they asked for an accommodation, for like a video interview or like an automated tool, and they intervene beforehand because they know, well, somebody is deaf, like it's going to be really hard for them to understand what they're being asked. I have to like sign it then to them, they have to sign it back, then I have to answer, like the video interview is going to be over the 3 minutes you get before that even happens, so let's just ask for an accommodation. And the folks that I talked to said, like, most of the time they didn't get an accommodation, no one called them back, they didn't get an email, the voicemail was full. So it seems like the accommodation process is a little bit broken, that it shouldn't be, because that is actually under the American with Disabilities Act, needs to be put into these systems. But I'm not sure if a company goes fully digital and automates these processes, that they're actually really thinking about, like, okay, how can we do an accommodation? Who should reach out? And I do think that I've heard rumblings in the community that people are really upset about it. And there might be, like a class action lawsuit or something, that they feel like, hey, like, if you want to like go digital, you have to bring everyone into the boat, and make sure that there is ways to get assessed, even if you can't use the standard assessment that you give to people. And to the benchmarking, I would love that, actually. If there was like, we know NIST is like the National Institute for Standards and Technology. They have like assessed, for example, facial recognition technology and have done benchmarking and said, like, this is a really good high bar that companies need to use. I would love that, because I think such scrutiny would actually probably smoke out what others have called snake oil, and stuff that doesn't work. So yeah, I would love to see benchmarking. I think some people were hopeful that the New York City law that mandates if you use AI in hiring, you have to get an audit of the tool once a year, and you have to publicize that, would maybe be some sort of benchmarking. But I think what has happened is like the standards are a little bit undefined. So I think what most people do is like they do the 4/5 rule that like is in the uniform guidelines by the EOC, and they look at like, do men and women pass at the certain rates, similar rates, right? And also people of different races. I think what's worrisome to me is that I reported on one audit that was pre that law that Pymetrics did of their tool, the video games. And when I talked to the auditor, which was actually a computer science professor, he said, oh, we did find a problem with like Black women. They didn't pass at similar rates. And when I looked at the final report, it wasn't in there. And I was like, wait, maybe that didn't happen. So I called him and I was like, no, it happened. But like, like Pymetrics told us we needed to do the 4/5 rule. And that is just men against women and like the different races, and not at the intersection of two identities. And I think the problem is that we know that in these systems, in a lot of these systems where historically marginalized group intersect, there often is where the systems break down. We saw that at the beginning with facial recognition technology. It was very good for men and women, but it really wasn't good for like Black women. And that is sort of might be the problem here. And we're not looking for that. And we're not looking for people with disabilities. We're not testing for that. How do they fare in these systems? So it's like not the hope of the benchmarking. I wish we would have that. It might come, there are regulators that are thinking all about this, but we don't know yet. And I think Susan put a question in the chat. Do you know the extent demographics of the companies using AI assessment tools? So AI assessment tool is kind of interesting because it's kind of blurry what an assessment is, right? Like we know that like video interviews, I would say that they use AI, is an AI assessment tool. So are the video, but it's like a resume parser an assessment tool. I would say yes. And that is pretty used pretty broadly. We know that companies use resume parsers. Do they always have AI turned on or not? So we know that a lot of Fortune 500 companies, I think we know that like over 90% use AI somewhere in the hiring funnel. But we're not privy to know exactly how they're using it. We know this from surveys of company leadership, that they use it, but they, no one has to disclose it. Yeah.
Do you think, Hilke, interestingly, like, and I think what you just said really resonated with me, that we know this high percentage of employers are using AI, which is great.
Or some
We don't know-
algorithmic tool, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
some algorithmic or machine learning type of matching technology. But we don't fully understand where it's being done or the quality of the structured data behind it that's allowing it to make those questions. I mean, make those decisions or assist us in making those decisions. Do you feel, so AI to me is like Bluetooth. I often think that in 5 years, we won't be talking about AI as much as we will, but what it's doing in the way we're using it, just like we do today with Bluetooth, right? So it just kind of grew from that structure. But do you feel that there's a place where there's going to be some type of government agency where, as we move forward and this becomes more pervasive in decision-making capabilities? So, I mean, I've seen it make decisions around medication. I've seen it make decisions around healthcare. I've seen it, the process. I've seen it make decisions around a lot of different things. At some point, it seems to me that there might be some type of agency, because this is now threatening the health of potentially a lot of people, like an FDA, that AI technologies need to be certified or approved.
Yes. The FDA already has a rule for software. If it becomes diagnostic, you have to get approved. I think what we often see is, or at least I did a whole episode on vocal biomarkers, which are tools that are supposed to find symptoms of like Parkinson's, or if you're depressed or anxious, out of your speech stream. We don't know if the technology really works. And the way, no one has gotten FDA approval, but some medical providers use it because they use it adjacent to diagnosis. So it's not a diagnostic tool where the tool analyzes your speech stream and say like, oh, you're in a deep depression, we're going to send you this medication, but it's like doctors are using it on an ongoing basis. So it's like adjacent to that. I think that is a way to not having to actually go to the FDA. I do hope that we will see that kind of government regulation and testing. I'm very doubtful that with, we haven't seen it under a Biden administration. I'm not sure if a second Trump administration is going to start that. I doubt it. Like there's a push for less government regulation. So I think what we might see is like, the European Union having much stricter things, controls and those things. I mean, we've seen like the CPB was like hiring for a technologist, but one person, like this would take a lot of testing. And I do think like going back to the audits under the New York City law, I mean, I've reported on those. I see them a little bit more critically, maybe than others, because they're paid for by the companies. And I think we've seen this in like the subprime mortgage problems that led to the recession 10 years ago. No, 15 years ago now.
15,
we
yeah.
also had auditors auditing these tools and like giving them AAA ratings, although they were junk mortgages, right? Like that was because the banks were paying them to the rating agencies to rate them. I think this is kind of a similar system. So I'm not sure this is going to be like super helpful. Maybe smokes out the worst vendors, but maybe not shows us who are the best tools are. I would love to do longitudinal studies that we do with kind of vaccine and medical developments, where you have like where you hire like people who are used with like traditional hiring methods, AI hiring methods, and you hire everyone, and then you check thousands of people, right? It doesn't work on like small sample size. And then you check years from now, the person who was labeled a no, well, were they successful or not? The person who was labeled a yes, like, and if you have a large enough sample size, you can probably make some have some meaningful result out of that. So that would be really helpful. I haven't found a company that wants to do that. And I haven't seen a company that actually does that. I wish companies would do that. I know companies sort of do anecdotal challenges and look at the data over time and feel like, these people that come out of the system, that come through the system, they're actually not that good. So they quietly abandon some of the tools, or they found that like less women come through and then they don't use the tool anymore. I wish that would be more public so the next company can learn from it. But I think companies are just really afraid that if they come out and say like, hey, the tool that we used, we think it didn't let women through at similar rates, that they're going to have a PR disaster, or maybe have a class action lawsuit against them.
That's a very hard line to walk. And Eric's made that's a really interesting point Eric just made in chat, that perhaps there should be a recognized AI ethics certification for companies that need to be in place when they're hiring. And I do agree, Eric, on likewise, I do think AI vendors, or any vendor that's bringing AI into that decision-making process, needs to have some type of third-party validation that the decision-making capabilities, whether it's selective or assistive in the generative AI model, is serving the purpose that it was designed to do. Because we've seen numbers of, and I always go back to Amazon. They put together an AI model with no ill intent, but it turned out to be a very flawed model. If anyone's not familiar with it, you just Google Amazon AI hiring and it will share all, well, I think it was 2017 or 18. Technology's come a long way since then, but that's still to me a great example of some really smart people getting together and building something that discriminated instantly. So the certification on the vendor standpoint, to me, seems really important.
Yeah, I would love that. I mean, and I think we are starting to think through like what are sort of ethical ideas. Like, there's like many different ideas of fairness. There's machine fairness, there's human fairness, there's all kinds of different ways that we can think through fairness. So we haven't fully standardized yet. I think what we see, and I'm looking a lot to the European Union because they're a much more heavy regulation area, and they just passed the EU AI law that will actually outlaw some of the emotion recognition in the European Union. So sometimes we hope then, if it happens in the EU, then vendors will follow. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes it will. And we see there is also a need for impact assessments before you actually supply an AI tool. And I wish that, if an AI vendor doesn't have a technical report that tells you how they came up that this tool is valid and how it was tested and how it was tested for discrimination, you should probably run the other way, because if they don't have that basic minimum, and if you get that document, scrutinize it, because I've actually gotten a couple, and when I shared it with IOs, industrial organization psychologists and others who do this for a living, we took it apart. They're like, oh, this was 90 pages to hide that they have a like under 0.3 validity, which is under a statistical significance. So like scrutinize this, like hire outside counsel to help you scrutinize this, because they, it's like couched in a lot of language, and you can actually, and I think before you buy an AI tool, you're in a good position to push a company to disclose and do kind of pilot studies, give you those technical reports. I wish those technical reports would be public. I think that should be the bare minimum for a company to tell us how they validated the tool and how they checked it for discrimination. But I don't make the rules. So I just report what is happening in the space. And, we see in sort of a reckoning happening where we now like have even more applications. And I would say the first generation of AI tools were sort of maybe a little flawed in the idea that we just replicated sort of processes that kind of already didn't work. And now it kind of really doesn't work. So it might be time to think through, like, do we need to do more assessments and really look for the skills that people have and not rely on a resume, which isn't all that predictive. I can put on that I know Python, but do you really know if I know Python and how good I am? Kind of really don't know. And maybe I'm a smooth talker in job interviews. I tell you I'm like the best team worker ever and have all these great examples. but I'm not actually a good team worker in real life. So I do think there might be a promise. We see the highest validity, the prediction, how successful you be in a job if you make you do the job. It's not very good people to hire people and let them go after a month and put them in the job. But I do feel with like maybe virtual reality or some kind of AI, we could actually test people doing the job, parts of the job, and they would get a sense of the job, and you would get a sense as the employer of like, how good would this person be? But that would require a lot of thought, like what are actually the skills that people really need for this job, the 5 most important one, not the laundry list of 30, 50 that we see now, where you take an old job description, just add 5 new things, right? And then you have these bombastic job descriptions that like may or may not have a lot of connection to the actual role. So I think those are all questions we need to grapple with in the future.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, and I know we're at time, so just quickly, it seems like we're also at a pivoting point of processes in the recruiting process as well, in terms of how we make decisions when we think about people with neurodiversity, when we think about people with different backgrounds, and the different technologies are now coming into this. I think holistically, we need to think about, personally to me, a better process for inclusion and matching to bring people into. Certainly, if you look at the statistics around the labor market, we are going into some interesting times in terms of the number of people coming in versus the number of opportunities. So that inclusive thinking, that matching capability, supported by AI, seems to me to be a very logical evolution of how we go in, rather than thinking exclusionary, thinking inclusively to make those matches happen. To me, that seems to be a very positive thing. And it's interesting because given watching my son on AI, he's going to match every job that he applies for. Its resume is spot on. And it's even buzzword to pass the ATS system. So that's the other thing he knew how to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole world out there of job seekers trying to help each other, right? Like we haven't even talked about that. There's like YouTube channels and other things. I have to run too, so I need to apologize. I put my email
That's okay.
In the chat. So feel free to email me, be in touch. I'm also on LinkedIn, pretty active there. Feel free to connect with me. I'm happy to be in touch. I'm happy to, we run pilot studies. We try to build new tools. So happy to be in touch with folks.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Hilke. Thank you, everybody, for attending. It was really a very interesting discussion for me. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion as we move forward. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.